For us, we've been commanded to follow Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to be very clear. But they were the people who carried Islam, the one who followed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's the method and the tariqah. Now, when we're discussing that, we talked about the life of Abu Bakr, how he went through, even though he was one of the best among the Meccans. What kind of a difficult times that Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, he went through because of the message of Islam that he accepted, and not only accepted, but he carried on to very close friends of his. That included the people who became Muslim right away under the leadership of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh. That included Sahabah like Uthman bin Affan, Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah, Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, Zubayr bin al-Awwam, and so on and so forth. These Sahaba that I'm talking about, these were the Sahaba who were from the 10 who were given the glad tidings of Jannah by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this dunya. So you can imagine the fadl and the level of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, because through him many of the great Sahaba entered the fold of Islam. But even him, being one of the best among the Meccans, being the one who carried the Islam to so many great Sahaba as well, he had to go through many difficult times. As we discussed last week, that he was beaten up so much, so severely, that his face started bleeding so much that you could not distinguish the nose from the face. This is Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. He was almost died, as we discussed last week. And then we talked about how Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he protected Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in this phase of the da'wah when Rasulullah was calling people openly towards Islam. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that proclaim openly and separate yourself from the mushrikeen. And that was the time that Rasulullah's da'wah became open, and the Sahaba and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, they went through difficult times. And Abu Bakr was famous for being the one of the people who freed many of the slaves who became Muslim. He bought them and freed them in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That included Bilal Habashi radiallahu anhu as well, Bilal bin Rabah. And we talked about Bilal bin Rabah as well last week, how he was tortured by his master Umayyah bin Khalaf, and he was torturing him so much that Bilal bin Rabah, instead of complaining about to Allah Azza wa Jalla or anything like that, he was continuously used to say ahadun ahad. And once he was asked why he was saying ahadun ahad, he said if he would have known any other kalima more than this one that would have harmed the kuffar, he would have used that. So the oneness of Allah Azza wa Jalla, this is what they would have to do. It's not like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was saying to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, not to worship that hundreds of false gods that they had. And we kind of touched about that. Let's not get mixed up with this to think that when we talk about the gods have to be, false gods have to be statues as they were creating those days. Gods can be of different forms and variation. They could be, the gods can be, the wealth can be the God, could be some of those leaders who are calling toward other than Allah Azza wa Jalla. If we start following them other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they can become God. Why? Well, Allah Azza wa Jalla says so. Do not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they took their ahbar and ruhban, their monks and their rabbis, the scholars, as their gods. And we talked about that before in a couple of talks, that Allah Azza wa Jal referred to them when people start following blindly people without knowing what they are calling for. Rather, they are following them instead of knowing that if they're asking people to follow Allah Azza wa Jal, that's one thing. Meaning, if the scholar comes and tell the people, this is the rule of Allah Azza wa Jal, this way you should be following. But if the people start following those scholars just because the scholar said so, and that's sufficient for them, even though it contradicts what Allah has said, that is referred as making them as their arbab, as their lords. And this is condemned by Islam very heavily. So understand that the shirk or making partners with Allah Azza wa Jal is more than just statues. It could be many, many different things can be considered as the gods. So now today's talk, we'll talk about some more stories of the Sahaba who, in this phase of the da'wah, which is when Rasulullah was proclaiming this message of Islam, what kind of a difficult time they went through. But I want to just kind of as an introduction to remind us something, because that will be kind of a summing up mentioning these stories. As the hadith of Rasulullah reported by Aisha radiallahu anha, Aisha said that قال ما خير رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بين أمرين أحدهما أيسر من الآخر إلا اختار أيسرهما ما لم يكن إثما فإن كان إثما كان أبعد الناس منه. Aisha said Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم, whenever he was given Amarain, two choices, and Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم among those two choices always chose the easier one. He always chose the easier one. But the hadith goes on, and we have to understand what it means. It says that in case it did not involve any sin, malam yakun ithma, that there is no sin involved in either of the choices. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam chose the easier choice is not because so the haram was easier than the halal, to go for the haram one. No, rather it is about two things which are halal to begin with. So two choices which are mubah. As a matter of fact, this hadith is mentioned by Imam Muslim, and the name of the chapter in which Imam Muslim reported this hadith is called his avoidance of sin, his choosing the easier of the permissible, mubah. It says specifically that وَإِخْتِيَارِهِ مِنَ الْمُبَاحِ, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given the choices of two halal things, which are two mubah, permissible things. Among them, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam always chose the easier of them. So this concept has to be understood correctly. We should not be thinking of easier means that we have a choice that between haram and halal, haram seems easier so we can go for it. So that's not the case. It's more of a two mubah things, and among them, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam chose the easier one. Now, today, inshallah, we'll talk about a couple of stories that included the story of Ali Yasir. Ali Yasir was the family of Yasir radiallahu an, that included his wife Sumayya radiallahu anha and his son Ammar bin Yasir radiallahu an. So these three, they became the victims of the Quraysh as well, because they were from a weak from the weak belonging, a weak tribe, weak family, and some of the stories talk about they were the slaves, and they were from a free slave of Bani Makhzum, they say. So now, when Abu Jahl, he was torturing them because of they became Muslim. Remember that they were tortured for nothing but because they accepted the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yes, they were from the poor ones. Yes, they were from the destitute ones. As we discussed last week about Bilal Habashi radiallahu an, we see that there were many of the people who accepted Islam from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the beginning phase were very poor people, and they were the ones who were the destitute ones. But it should not be thought of it that they were looking for a way out of being poor, a way out to be destitute people. Rather, they found the haqq, and this haqq really hit them deeply in their hearts. Hence, they accepted it. Look, if they were just looking for easier life, this is not what Islam gave them in Mecca, especially in Mecca. Their life became more difficult because of accepting Islam. But they were the ones who were really open for solutions, or the kind of the lifestyle that they were living, the lifestyle that were offered by the Meccans that was oppressing the weak ones. So they see that the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal is the one that provides justice for the poor or rich, weak or strong. It doesn't matter. So remember that they accepted Islam because of the understanding of the Tawheed, the understanding of the Aqidah, the understanding of La ilaha illallah was deeply rooted in their hearts. That's what moved them. This is why you see that even when they're going through all these hardships, they did not give in. They did not give up. Even the example of Ammar, we see that he did say certain words, which was just the lip service rather than against Islam even. But in general, we don't see any of them were giving into Islam. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was passing by Ali Yasir, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told them when he saw the hardship that they were going through, he said, "Sabran Ali Yasir, fa inna mu'idakum al-jannah." That, oh Ali Yasir, have sabr, have patience, have perseverance. Sabr means perseverance. Sabr means you are in the place of ease, or you're in the place of hardship, you continue to do what Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded. You do not give in to the commands of Allah Azza wa Jal. That's what sabr means. Sabr never understood, never meant in Islam as that somebody come and beat you up and you just go in the corner and continue to get their beatings. No, sabr means no matter what kind of situation you are in, you continue to do what Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded you to do. And that's what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was recommending Ali Yasir, Sabran Ali Yasir, فَإِنَّ مَعِدَكُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. That he said that indeed there is a promise for you, which is the Jannah. Jannah is promised for you. And one of the reports talk about, they said, we can smell the Jannah. Subhanallah. This is how the Sahabah, when they were going through these difficult times because of following the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that was their response. And Abu Jahl, he continued to torture Ali Yasir, and to the point he martyred Sumayya radiallahu anha first before Yasir. Both of them were martyred, but Sumayya was martyred even before Yasir, and she was the first martyr of Islam, first Shahida of Islam. She was a Shaheed even before any of the male Sahabi became a Shaheed. So the first Shahida or the martyr of Islam was a woman, and she gave her life for deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so was Yasir. Now, after that, Abu Jahl continued to torture Ammar radiallahu anhu as well. He was young and he was forcing him to say some kufr or reject the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say things about Allah in the favor. And he did that. But in Islam, one of the concepts is that if there is your life in danger, which is called the rukhsa from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a permissibility from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that if you are going through a situation where your life is in danger, in that case, from the mouth, you are allowed to say things which are not allowed in Islam. Okay, so even in that case, the lying is permissible by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Man kafara billahi min ba'di imani illa man ukriha wa qalbu mutma'innu bil iman, walakin man sharaha bil kufr sadran fa alayhim ghadabun min Allah wa lahum 'adhabun alim." This ayah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when Ammar came and reported back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam what happened, and he said certain things which are kufr basically, and he says the meaning of verses: whoever disbelieves in Allah after his belief, except him who is forced thereto, and whose heart is at rest with faith. In that case, he is okay. But if his heart is the one that's not at rest, is not along with what he said, then of course that is punishable, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala adab can be on him. Now, this was Ali Yasir. Now about Ammar, there's a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so we understand his level among Islam. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Sahabah, they were building the masjid, and everybody was bringing a brick, and Ammar was carrying 2 bricks. Everybody's bringing one, Ammar is bringing 2 of them. And when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw him, he said, "Why Ammar taqtuluhu fiyatul baghiya yad'uhum ila al-jannah wa yad'unahu ila an-nar." He's talking about Ammar bin Yasir radiyallahu anhu. He's predicting, giving the prophecy about Ammar, the Sahabi we just talked about, and the family of Ammar. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he saw Ammar, he's carrying more load than a regular Sahabi, and then he said, "May Allah be merciful to Ammar. He will be inviting them," meaning his murderers and rebellious group, to the Jannah, and they will invite him to the hellfire. And we know of Ammar bin Yasir radiallahu anhu. He lived through the time of the Khulafa Rashidin, and he was martyred in the time of Ali radiallahu anhu. And this is what it was referring to. And just a clarification, so we do not think of it when we're talking about those 2 baghiyah, those 2 groups, as if we are talking about the one who's calling towards the hellfire means they were kuffar or something. We are talking about the Sahaba even at that time, Muawiyah and them. it is more of they are at fault. That's what the hadith is talking about. So we are not the one going to do, because that was their ijtihad, and we leave it like that as Muslim. We are not going to be the one who will be saying bad things about the Sahaba, Ridwanullah alayhim. Rather, it was their ijtihad, whether they was at the wrong at the right. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned about Ammar. Ammar is the one who was at right at that time. That's what I mean by he's calling towards Jannah, and the other group was calling towards towards the hellfire. Okay, other Sahabi, which is we should know about during this time of the Mecca. And we find more of these in the Meccan era, because Meccan time was the one Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and Sahaba did not have an upper hand. They did not have power. So the ones who are coming into Islam, they are not coming into Islam because they are hypocrites. Makes no sense to be a hypocrite in the Meccan era of the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, because you become a Muslim, you are going through all these difficult things. So you find the hypocrisy among the people when Rasulullah migrated into Medina, because there the people see that Rasulullah is the one who has the power, he's the one who's implementing the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. Hence, we start seeing that there are some people among them who were hypocrites as well. But that's a Meccan era we are discussing, and among them, one of the Sahabi who went through a difficult time of Khabbab bin al-Arab. This Sahabi, radiallahu anhu, later after Islam flourished, and he also seen the times of the Khulafa Rashidin as well, he used to show his back, how they used to harm him in Mecca. He was a blacksmith, and his master used to harm him because of accepting Islam, to the point that they would take a hot iron and hit him with a hot iron on his head, and there are reports talk about on his back also. They used to put him on a burning embers, and his skin of the back would, or the fat on it, would melt and extinguish those embers. And thereon, he used to show his back, and there were like holes, black holes on the back of Khabbab bin al-Arab, radiallahu anhu. This is the Sahabi, one time, when he is going through all difficult times, went to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this hadith is reported by Bukhari. And in this hadith, Khabbab bin al-Arab, he mentioned that, he said the Sahaba, including him, we complained to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam about the difficult times that we are going through. So he was sitting in the shade of the Kaaba with his burda, and we said to him, would you seek help for us? Would you seek help for us? Make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that all these hardships will be relieved. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam's response to them was, among the nations before you, a believing man would be put in ditch, and that was dug up for him, and a saw would be put up on top of his head, and he would be cut into two pieces. Or they would bring an iron comb, and they would comb the meat out of his body, leaving the bones. And this is how the kind of a hardship the previous nations went through because of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, even for that, they did not give up the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, by Allah, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, Wallahi, لا يتمنا هذا الأمر حتى يصير الراكب من الصنع إلى حضر الموت. That he said, this amr, this deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by Allah will be completed until a rakib, a rider, will travel from Sana'a ila Hadr al-Maut, to the distant cities in Yemen, and they were famous for the route of the robbers, armed robbers in between. And Rasulullah said, this deen will flourish, the deen will complete to the point a rider will travel from Sana'a to Hadr al-Maut, la yakhafu illa Allah aw al-dhi'ba ala ghanam. That he said, and he will not fear anybody but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the wolf for his sheep. That's an animal that would attack the sheep. But the security Islam will provide will be given to him. And then وَلَكِنَّكُمْ تَسْتَعْجِلُونَ, but you guys are being تَسْتَعْجِلُون, you are being hurrying up, you are hasty for the deen of Allah to be completed. Now, this is the same Khabbab bin al-Arab. In the time of Umar al-Khattab, when he was the Khalifa at that time, and he saw that Khabbab came. So when Khabbab came, Umar stood up, and he was in a meeting, and Khabbab shows up. He gets up. Look, he was a slave. But look how Islam raised the level of a slave. That's because of the deen of Allah Azza wa Jalla. That's what they stood up for. It's not just because of what family they belong to. It's not because of how much wealth they carry. It's not because what tribe they belong to. If that would have been the case, the tribal thing, then Abu Lahab was the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Jahl was the uncle of Umar al-Khattab, radiallahu anhu. And Uqba bin Uayd was the stepfather of Uthman bin Affan. Look where they are. But it's not that. It's not the wealth. You can see the wealthiest among them, they will be in the hellfire, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned about that. But here, Khabbab, his status was so high that Umar, the Amir al-Mu'mineen, stood up for him is because of his attachment to deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he stood up and he said, no one is more deserving than you to be in this assembly than other than Bilal. So Bilal has a higher status for Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu in his mind. Of course, he was the muadhin of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said, and he asked Khabbab about the torture and the persecution he had received at the hands of the mushrikeen. Khabbab described this some details. He started giving, as I was talking about, the kind of detail he mentioned that, and he exposed himself to make it more clear what he was talking about, the part of the body that he was tortured. And Umar was aghast at what he saw. When he saw the kind of torture Khabbab went through. And this is why Khabbab radiallahu anhu had a high status in the eyes of the Sahabah ridwanullah alayhim. Now, another Sahabi in the very same time, in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see is Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, a hadith that is mentioned by Ahmad bin Hanbal, and he talks about Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, that some Sahaba, they were sitting and they were saying, and this is the beginning of the da'wah. We talked about Abdullah bin Mas'ud before as well. It's the beginning of the da'wah, and Sahaba said, the kuffar have not heard anybody reciting the Quran openly yet except through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is there anybody who would like to do that? Abdullah bin Mas'ud said, I will do it. Now, look at the mentality Sahaba understood well. First, his stature. He was a weak person from the stature-wise, the physique-wise. Also, he was from a weak clan. He was from a weak clan. So Abdullah bin Mas'ud, Sahaba said, no, you should not. You should not because of your weakness that we are seeing. And he said, no, let me. So Abdullah insisted, so I said, okay, go ahead. And he said, Allah will protect me from their evil. He went into Kaaba around, as it says, he went to Maqam Ibrahim, which is not too far away from the Kaaba itself. And it was the dawn time, Fajr time, and Quraysh was gathered there. He started reciting a beautiful surah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ar-Rahman, Allama al-Quran, Khalaq al-Insan. This is the surah that many of us, even if we don't understand Arabic, it's such a beautiful surah to listen. And he continued reciting until this kuffar, they said, what is he reciting? Oh, they realized, oh, this is Quran they're reciting. They started beating him up. And they say, oh, this is Umar Abd saying that he's reciting Quran. He's reciting what is revealed to Muhammad, they're saying. So they start beating him up. And then finally, somehow, all his face was bleeding and all that. He came back to Sahaba. And Sahaba said, look, this is what we are scared of. This is what we were scared of is going to happen to you. You should have not gone there. And he said, by Allah, Abdullah said, the enemies of Allah are not more comfortable than I am. I am more comfortable. I feel more comfort by this beating than the situation they are in. And he said, if you wish, I'll go tomorrow again. Subhanallah. See, that's what means by that, how they were moved by this La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. When we are talking about these early Muslims, the way they are acting, there are not that many ahkam there. There's no five-time prayer is not obligatory yet. There is no hajj yet. There is no fasting yet. The fasting of the month of Ramadan. There is no zakah over them yet. So even the basic pillars, many of the pillars of Islam did not exist at that time. But the main pillar, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, that drove them to do these acts, that was there. And that's the one that prepared them for anything that was revealed afterwards. They were there to say, Sami'na wa ata'na, we hear and we obey. So we better have this correct understanding of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. If we really want to be like the Sahaba, we think of what we want to revive these legends, then we better be And we better have correct understanding of this, the message of the Tawheed, the message of La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. Now look at this Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anh, what Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said about him. One time, he was collecting some toothpicks, which is a siwak, from one of the trees, and he had very thin shins, the feet, saqain they said. So he was picking it up, and the wind blew, and because of the wind was blowing, he fell. So Sahabah, they started laughing. Sahaba around them, they saw what was going on, they started laughing. Rasulullah said, "Mimma tadhakun?" Then what are you laughing for? And they said, "Ya Nabi Allah, min daqqati saqayhi," that because of the weakness of his shins. Rasulullah said, "Walladhi nafsi biyadi lahuma athqalu fil mizan min Uhud." Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, these saqayn that you're talking about, these thin shins that you're talking about, in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the scale, they are heavier than Uhud, the mountain of Uhud. This is what Abdullah bin Mas'ud was. But what made these thin shins to be that heavy is his iman, his attachment to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his sacrifices that he made for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He did not shy away from the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the moment any type of hardship fell on him. Okay. Inshallah, I'll talk about probably one more Sahabi, some stories, and then I'll conclude. I don't want to take it too long. We have time, right?
8:45 edition.
Okay, so we'll try to go by 8:10, inshallah, and then we'll take Q&A. Okay, other Sahabi, radiallahu anhu, was Uthman bin Mad'un, radiallahu anhu. This Sahabi was also from the early reverts to Islam, and he's one of those people who migrated to even Habasha as well. As a matter of fact, one of the reports talk about, he is the one who led the migration as well. So Uthman bin Mad'un, radiallahu anhu, when he came back from the Habasha, so he came to Mecca, and he found out that the Meccans were still the same situation, and they were giving the hard time to the Muslims. So many of them, they took the, which is called the aman, or the protection of anybody strong that they knew of from their family members or from the clan, from the tribe. Remember that in the tribal setup, it used to be if a tribal leader or somebody from a tribe gives you protection, that protection comes from the whole tribe. And he was given by Walid bin Mughira, the father of Khalid bin Walid, one of the strongest men of the Meccans, one of the strongest leaders. He gave this protection to him, and later on, Uthman bin Mad'un saw that other Muslims were going through very difficult times while he's under the protection, and he is the one who protected, nobody's harming him. So he said he'd rather give up this protection and be like the rest of the Sahaba. And he went to Walid bin Mughira, and he told him that I don't want your protection anymore. And Walid said, did anybody harm you? He said, no. He said, no, I don't want your protection anymore. He said, okay, let's go to Kaaba, and we will announce that Uthman said he will announce that because he is willingly saying that. He's not forced to take away this protection. Went to Kaaba, Walid bin Mughira announced that he is taking this protection back away from Uthman bin Mad'un, and then Uthman bin Mad'un, radiallahu anhu, he confirmed that this is not forced on him. And one day, after this protection was taken away from Uthman bin Mad'un, radiallahu anhu, he was walking by, and there was a poet. His name was Lubayy. He was saying some ash'ar in the Jahiliyyah, and he was talking about basically that he's talking about there's nothing good but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Uthman, when he heard, he said, you said the truth. And he said, everything is transient in the world. Everything is transient. He said, you lied. Because the goodness of the Jannah is not transient. It is eternal. And when he said that, he got angry because he was stopped for whatever the garbage that he was trying to say. Now, on that, some back and forth happened between him and Uthman, and he hit him hard to the point one of his eyes was hurt. Now, when Walid bin Mughira, he saw Uthman's eye was hurt like that, he went to him and he said, oh, my nephew, if you were in my protection, that would have not happened to you. And the response of Uthman radiallahu anhu was that my other eye yearns the same pain that my eye that is having harmed has received. Subhanallah. This is how the Sahaba, ridwanullah alayhim, they looked at the pain even they received because of being in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, and then just to make it clear, it's not only the weak ones, we see the strong ones also went through the very same thing. Uthman bin Affan was strong in the sense that he had a backup. Same way, Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anhu, who was also the son-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, his uncle used to wrap him in a mat of a palm leaf and set him on fire. This is what Uthman bin Affan. He was one of the richest people in Mecca, even though. But because of his uncle, he went through these difficult times as well. Now, the point I'd like to make about these things, as I said, we are not here to just talk about the stories and go home and feel good, or mashallah, our heroes were strong. We have to understand what they were talking about, why they were acting like this, and what do we have to get out of it. Actually, there is a qarina in the fiqh that talks about ما كان فيها بيان من قول أو فعل بالضرورة الالتزام بها مع المشقة دون الاستبدال بغيرها, which means an action or saying constantly done even with hardships, without alternative, that's an obligation. This is one of the qarina indicators of something is an obligation. If Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam continued on a path, along in the Sahaba we see the same thing, while they were on this path and they are going through difficult times, they did not change their path. That itself is a qarina that it means that action is an obligation. Okay? Otherwise, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would have changed the path. Now, so to conclude, from these stories, what we see is that one thing is to stick in with the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an obligation on us. If Allah has commanded us something, we cannot be the one who are looking for loopholes. We should not be looking for, say, or something is more beneficial than the other, or we're looking for, as a terminology used many times, that we have to really think about when somebody says, oh, we're picking a lesser of an evil. When we say lesser of an evil, what are we saying here? Lesser of two haram? Or don't we have any other path, but those two haram are must on us to choose from? Something to think about. These Sahaba, you don't see them looking for a lesser of a haram when they're going through these difficult things. You don't see them looking for, because it's difficult, look for an easier path, easier way out. As the hadith I mentioned in the beginning of it, the hadith is about two mubah, two permissible things are given to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He always chose the easier one. Not about between halal and haram, because haram is easier, so we can go by that. No. As a matter of fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَن يَكُونَ لَهُمْ الْخِيَارَةُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِمْ. The verse says, it is not fitting for a believing man or a woman when Allah and His Messenger has decided a decree or command, then He has any choice in them. وَمَنْ يَعْصِيَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ ضَلَّ ضَلَالًا مُبِينًا. That whosoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger, then he is on a clear deviation. Okay, so when we are talking about these stories of the Sahaba, let's keep that in mind. That why are we discussing these stories? It's to us to understand that there could be difficult times will come on our way. Of course, when you talk about difficult times, of course, we will discuss Sahabas, like when the things becomes easier, when Islam started flourishing as well. The purpose is not just to talk about all the difficult times of Sahaba. As we are going through chronological order of the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the roles of the Sahaba, we see that this is the time when they went through very difficult times, but this is the time that the difficult time they went through is the one that ended in a time when Islam started flourishing. And today, alhamdulillah, we call ourselves Muslims, that somebody reached out to us and we are able to see the truth in the deen of Allah Azza wa Jalla. So inshallah, I'll stop my talk here. If there is any questions or comments about the subject cover, I'll try to answer them if I can, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
Can you